Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all ages. Do not adjust your screens, your phones, your laptops. This is not a rerun. I am back for Britt's Fantasy Blitz. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm your host, Britt Flinn. Today, we have a ton of stuff to talk about. Skinny, thank you so much. I've missed you guys too. Would love to see you guys throw your questions and comments in the chat. Also, if while you're there, remember to like and subscribe to both the Fantasy Alarm and Better Sports Network fantasy channels and YouTube channels. And thank you to my producer, Ernie Acosta. Angie, great time to see you. Mr. Scampers, great to see you as well. Thank you guys so much for being here. But like I said, we've got a lot to get to today. We're going to recap last night's game, which was kind of a crazy blowout that was unexpected at Lambeau Field. We're going to talk about some players that it's over with and a little bit of foreshadowing. I'm ripping the Band-Aid off. So you'll want to stay tuned for that, just in case there are a few tears and some drama involved in that. And finally, in case you haven't heard, this is the official NFL Revenge Week. So we're going to talk about some players who have some revenge games and which of those players could be good in your lineup. So let's just jump right into it. The Lions beat the Packers 34-20 last night. And to start out, whatever limitations were on David Montgomery going into this game were completely non-existent. He had 121 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns. I mean, while we need to praise Montgomery's performance, we also need to have a legitimate conversation about how the Lions are planning to use Jahmyr Gibbs going forward. Montgomery outsnapped Gibbs 53-28. And while they ran a similar number of routes, 16-14, Montgomery also outcarried Gibbs 32-8, despite having a way lower yards per carry average. We always knew, right, that it was going to be a two-headed backfield in Detroit, similar to what it was last year with Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift. And maybe this was just a game script situation, but this is getting frustrating. The Lions front office celebration video, I don't know if you guys have seen that, where they were all jumping around and hugging when they got Gibbs. This will go down as one of the biggest red herrings in fantasy history if we do not end up seeing Gibbs with more usage down the stretch. And quite frankly, it's getting a little frustrating. Sam Laporta, on the other hand, is officially him. On the season, he has 22 receptions for 242 yards. And it's not only that he's being productive, it's the way that he's doing it. He's just absolutely establishing dominance, and that's the big headline. He's got 6 contested catches, 4 missed tackles throughout 4 games, and that is unheard of for a rookie tight end. Not to mention that his catches and his yardage being unheard of for a rookie tight end, but just how dominant of a player he is in his rookie season. Now, Jameson Williams is set to come back after his 6-game suspension. We'll have to wait and see how that affects him. But honestly, I don't think it's really going to affect him at all. I think it's really more going to affect the Khalif Raymonds and Josh Reynolds in that group rather than it is Sam Laporta. So if you bought the dip on Laporta in your fantasy drafts or picked him up off waivers, you've got to be feeling pretty good about life right now. Detroit also looked very good on the other side of the ball in all aspects, with Aiden Hutchinson and their defensive line stepping up yet again, and their secondary showed up really big in big moments. Brian Branch's injury was really scary as he was carted off, but he still ended up coming back and putting pressures on people. The versatility of this rookie safety out of Alabama cannot be understated. In total, Detroit's defense had 5 sacks and 2 interceptions, which is very solid, especially on the road in Lambeau Field. After the game, the panel was interviewing David Montgomery and Jared Goff, and Ryan Fitzpatrick said before the game that Jared Goff was a, quote, poor man's Matt Ryan. Goff kind of clapped back and said that he didn't know that he was a poor man anything. And just, Ernie, can we look at David Montgomery's face the moment that this went down? I mean, Montgomery, that look, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. I would wager to say that that look is worth more. I mean, Montgomery knew that they had done stepped on some toes, that they had done messed up. And yeah, he's very confident in both his quarterback and his team going forward. So, whoever that cameraman was, kudos to you. You deserve a raise because capturing that picture is priceless. On the other side of the ball for the Packers, both Christian Watson and Aaron Jones returned for action for the Packers, but I use action very loosely. Watson did salvage some of his fantasy value with a late touchdown, but he only played 26 of the Packers' 57 snaps. Aaron Jones had even less of a role, playing only 20 snaps last night. Now, there were times where I was kind of looking, especially after it looked like he got hurt at one point during that flip tackle, that maybe he was being pulled because he got re injured. So maybe that was a part in why he wasn't on the field, but it was not good either way. I don't know if it's injury maintenance or what, but Packers offense does not have a lot of depth and they need every piece that they currently have. Speaking of that, they definitely needed Luke Musgrave last night, and he left very early after being placed in concussion protocol. Simultaneously, unfortunately, while ruining all my underdog fantasy pick'ems and the Packers' chances for a win, not to mention that I finally benched Kyle Pitts for Luke Musgrave. So if you're looking for Kyle Pitts to have a breakout, here it is. I benched him. He's going to go off this week on my bench. So just a little aside from that injury, we wish the best for Musgrave and hope that he can clear concussion protocol quickly and be back next week. The Packers also have some really big problems along their offensive line with David Bakhtiari going on IR. There's been some discussion about whether or not it's going to be season ending. He's at least going to miss 4 games. And the way that that offensive line looked last night, they're going to have to get that figured out and protect Jordan Love because he was being pressured, he was being rushed, he could not go through his progressions. I mean, he was having a super difficult time getting any kind of situation past that Detroit defense. So, bottom line takeaway from last night's game, the Lions are the king of the North. Mr. Scampers in the chat saying started Love over Lamar versus Cleveland. Thank goodness for that rushing touchdown. Look, I think that you did the right thing because that Cleveland defense is very, very tough. They're only allowing 111 passing yards per game. Lamar and his wide receiving core as a whole have only averaged 190 passing yards per game. And Cleveland's not only good against the pass, they're good against the run. So any chance that Lamar has to kind of scamper off and get some points with his leg, I think that you made the right call. We did not expect this to be the blowout that it was. So, yeah. Sellers in the chat saying having Montgomery on the bench in 2 leagues while starting Gibbs in every league, buddy, I feel your pain. You and I were both very, very high on Jahmyr Gibbs. Hopefully the Lions can get that figured out. And then my mom in the chat saying that, yes, it was indeed a very sad week for my uncle who was born and grew up in Wisconsin to see the Packers go down in the fashion that they did. If you guys have any starter sit questions in the chat, I believe I saw one earlier. Lamar or Kirk Cousins? I'm absolutely going Kirk Cousins. This is from Isaiah Rodriguez. That game's going to be probably a shootout. I know that both defenses and offenses are bad, but they're going to have to put up some points. Again, like we just mentioned, Lamar has a very tough matchup against Cleveland and their defense, especially with some of his wide receivers. So I would go with Kirk. So let's hit some top news before we keep moving on. It has been a slow news day, so a little bit of these are popcorn headlines, but we do have our first London game on Sunday with the Falcons and Jaguars. So this is your reminder. Put this in your phone. Put this in your calendar. Do whatever you need to do to make sure that you wake up and set your lineups. I have been so guilty of this in years past by not realizing that it's a London game and then not getting up to check your inactives, not getting up to kind of tinker with my lineups. Make sure that you guys do that, especially as these injury reports roll in very, very early for some of us out there. And Dunn in the chat, hi, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. So, in other news, Vikings wide receiver Justin Jefferson is tired of the trade chatter and tired of people saying that they need to look into next season. The Vikings, of course, are one of the only four winless teams remaining in the NFL. They still have yet to extend Jefferson, although they did pick up his fifth year option, and they don't know who their quarterback is going to be next season. He may be tired of it, but this is a big concern, both for the fans, for fantasy players, and for the Vikings front office. In again, I said it was a slow news cycle. So we're going to talk about punters. The Pittsburgh Steelers signed a player who has been out of the league for 6 years this week. And that guy is punter Brad Wing. Now, he is on the practice squad right now, but their current punter, Presley Harvin, is dealing with a hamstring injury, and he is going to be a true game time decision. So, this is going to be just potentially one of those feel good stories. But if you have any of those Texans playmakers on your roster, this is something to monitor because if the Steelers can't get that ball punted down, Damian Pierce might finally have a role. So, that's going to be something to watch very, very closely. Continuing on the trend of practice squad players, the Cowboys signed former first round offensive lineman Billy Price to their practice squad. Dallas's offensive line has dealt with a ton of injuries already this season, and they're going into Sunday with three of their key offensive linemen questionable. So they may need that depth to prevent another embarrassing loss like the one suffered in Arizona last Sunday, which I don't even want to talk about. Don't even want to talk about it, but I am here for the people, so I will. Anne asks, do I take a chance on Damian Pierce this week or sit him for one of these guys, Palmer, Elijah Moore, Robert Woods in PPR? I'm going with Josh Palmer. I don't think that Damian Pierce has shown anything really this season. It seems that he needs a very specific game script to get him incorporated. Meanwhile, Joshua Palmer is going to be that wide receiver two on the Chargers offense. He's going to get the snaps. He's going to get the targets. I really like him. Although, again, like I said, if that punting situation with Pittsburgh turns out rotten, Pierce may surprise us all, but I still like that sure thing in Palmer. Hal, thank you for joining us. Hello, Hal. Going against Monty and half point per carry, start Mims, Downs, or Palmer PPR. As much as I love Downs, I still think that I'm going Palmer. Mims has shown a lot when he's been on the field, but they won't put him on the field for some reason. I don't understand it. Downs, as great as he's been, he is still kind of rotating in and out as far as the snap share goes. And Anthony Richardson comes back. So I'm still gonna go with that sure thing in Palmer. Best of luck to you, Hal. I know that it's really, really tough going against Montgomery because I myself am. And I'm just gonna, chalk that up and hope for the best. So let's get to some injuries real quickly. As we mentioned, Packers offensive tackle David Bakhtiari is expected to miss the remainder of the season after being placed on IR. We don't know the time frame specifically as of yet, but this is a big blow to the Packers offensive line and in turn, Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon, Jordan Love, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, down the line. Jaguars wide receiver Zay Jones has already been ruled out for Sunday's London game. The Raiders quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo is still in concussion protocol and has not been practicing all week. So this is not looking good for his chances to play on Sunday. Sticking with quarterbacks, Derek Carr has also not practiced this week after suffering an AC joint sprain. And it's really looking like Jameis Winston is going to get that revenge game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Deshaun Watson also isn't throwing today. This is a very rough week for quarterbacks, y'all. He's nursing a shoulder injury. Apparently, he went out today, threw one pass in practice, and then walked over to the sideline to talk to a trainer. If he can't go, it's going to be the electric rookie out of UCLA, Dorian Thompson Robinson. who also has some rushing ability and will be very interesting to see. Now, if he does play, I will say that that does downgrade a lot of Cleveland's pass catchers. Um, Also, that game is probably going to be very, very low scoring. So I would steer away from it if possible. Bryce Young is set to return against the Vikings for the Panthers, but Miles Sanders did not practice today and is officially questionable. Colts quarterback Anthony Richardson has practiced all week and cleared concussion protocol today, leading to him to get the start on Sunday. Joe Burrow was also a full participant in practice, which is very good news for all of us who have stood there with him and waited on him to produce after 3 weeks of just not even mediocrity, just terribly poor quarterback play. Against the Titans, this is the comeback game for Joe Burrow. And if he can't get it done against the Titans, then I'll start to panic. Chargers running back Austin Eckler is practicing this week, which bodes well for his chances to play. The Ravens, as I mentioned, are struggling with a ton of injuries, including wide receivers Rashad Bateman and Odell Beckham Jr., as well as running backs Justice Hill and Gus Edwards. Don't even get me started on their offensive line and their defense. I mean, these guys are all questionable for Sunday's tough matchup against the Browns. Again, very, very low scoring game is what it's shaping up to be, and I would steer away if you can. The San Francisco 49ers also have a ton of problems in their wide receiver room with Debo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and Juwan Jennings all on the injury report. Not looking good for a strong passing game. Look for lots of runs. I would even wager that you could put in Elijah Mitchell in a lineup or two because this is going to be run, run, run against a very poor Cardinals defense. Finally, Rams wide receiver Puka Nacua was once again limited in practice this week with that lingering oblique injury. Although he's been able to play through it over the past 2 weeks, it may turn some eyes to Tutu Atwell, who did score a touchdown and possibly could have had two had the refs not called the first one back. So keep your eye on him as far as your matchups go. Hal's asking Chuba Hubbard, Sanders, or A Chan, which we now know it's pronounced. Um, Man, I need to wait and see the status on Sanders. If Sanders doesn't go, I'm leaning Chuba just because of how terrible the Vikings offense is. And if Sanders, I mean, Achan, I think that we got a little too excited about him because of that game script against the Broncos on Sunday. Yes, he is dynamic, but he is also very small, and Buffalo's run defense is very, very good. So take that for what you will. Speaking of the game last night, did you guys download the BetterCast app and talk with us and play the questions and just kind of get involved and integrated with that game last night? Because if you haven't, it is so much fun. You can join our free to play contest during NFL games this Sunday and Monday. You can predict what will happen. You can make picks, test your NFL knowledge, chat with our community about big plays, top performers, and busts in real time on the app. And you can also win prizes. Who doesn't love winning prizes? So if you don't have the BetterCast app, download the free BetterCast app in the Apple Play and or Apple App Store and the Google Play stores. On Fantasy Alarm, we've talked about this a lot. We've also got the All Pro subscription where you have access to literally everything on the site, not just NFL, every sport, every tool, every article. And I heard that although we have a 7-day free trial going on right now, that it might be going away very soon. So grab that free trial while you can. Go to fantasyalarm.com/allpro to sign up today and take advantage of that free trial while you can. Win some money this weekend. So let's move on to something that I'm not incredibly excited to talk about because this requires me ripping off a very, very large band aid. This segment is called It's Over Now. And I've had that song in my head all day long because at this point in the season, there are some players that we're worrying about, whether we used high draft capital on them, whether they're living up to our expectations. And at some point, especially in week 4, it's time to cut them from your roster. So let's talk about some guys you should cut the cord on and go free. I have my tissue right here. As I mentioned, I am ripping off the band aid to start this segment off. And this guy is Treylon Burks. Right before I went live, it was reported that he has been ruled out for Sunday, that is not related to the knee injury that he suffered, but something else. Y'all know that this hurts me so, so deeply to my core. But Ryan Tannehill and the Titans, they just stink. They just stink. And it's really affecting Burks. He's only seen 13 targets on the year, and maybe some of that is due to that knee injury that he was battling through, but he's only got 99 yards on the season. Ryan Tannehill is also awful. The entire offense is awful. And I honestly don't know if you can roster anyone aside from Derrick Henry and maybe DeAndre Hopkins from this Titans offense. This is just so, so horrible. And Chuck, no, this is not about Kelsey and Swift. It's the 80s song. It's over now. I don't want to risk a YouTube strike, but you guys get it. Second on my list, who it's over for me, is Juju Smith-Schuster from the Patriots. He only has 9 catches through the first 3 games, and he is only running 66.7% of the routes. Unfortunately, for Juju Smith-Schuster managers, tight ends are the feature of this offense, and all the receivers are just rotational pieces, with maybe the exception of Kendrick Bourne. Going into the season, everyone thought that Smith-Schuster was going to get the same usage as Jacoby Myers did, and that he was going to be a plug and play, that he's a slot guy, this and that, and he just has not been. Guys, cut him, let some other schmuck pick him up and wash your hands of him. Another guy on my list is Kadarius Toney from the Kansas City Chiefs. Why the Chiefs traded for this guy if they're not going to use him, I do not know. He has been battling through a knee injury going back to the offseason, but in week 3, he only ran 5% of the routes and had a 2% snap share. This guy is invisible as invisible gets. Spooky season is not supposed to be until October, yet Kadarius Toney is a ghost. They just refuse to use him. This Chiefs offense is Travis Kelce and everyone else. We can forget that one good game he had as his rookie season and get him off your roster. Finally, for wide receivers, it's Rashad Bateman. So much for Todd Monken's air raid offense, right? I mean, maybe it's because Bateman has been battling through injury, but nothing is clicking in this pass game aside from Zay Flowers. And even that is very, very low ADOT. He's just producing based on the number of targets. Bateman's snap and route percentage is decent, but he's still being outsnapped by Nelson Aguilar and is only seeing a 10% target share. You cannot trust him on any given week, especially this week against the Browns. So it's over for me. Moving on to the running backs, I know that a lot of people are very excited about the brother of this one this week, but it's Dalvin Cook for the Jets for me. What a disappointment so far this season. And sure, some of that blame can be placed on the fact that Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles 3 plays into the game, and that offense has not been efficient whatsoever. But Dalvin Cook himself cannot get anything going whatsoever. On the season, he's averaging 2.32 yards per carry. He does not get the ball enough to make up for those inefficiencies. And look, I know that running back is a wasteland. Everybody in every league that I'm in is like looking for running back, looking for running back. This guy is not one that you want. It's so hard to cut running backs, but this guy is not it. You cannot start him. I would rather take a flyer on a contingent running back than I would on someone who has shown you what to expect and offers nothing. So it's over for me, Dalvin. Mr. Scampers in the chat saying, is it sad I'm starting Latavius Murray over Juju? No, not at all. Not at all. The situation is sad, but it is not sad that you were making the correct lineup decisions. So, we learn, we adapt, we spot trends, and then we move on. And that is what fantasy football is all about. So, moving on to another running back who I have been trying to make a thing forever. This is AJ Dillon. Guys, we've been trying to make AJ Dillon happen for years. And whatever the reason, it's just not happening. It's like Gretchen Wieners trying to make fetch happen in Mean Girls. It's just not happening. Even with Aaron Jones out last week, Dillon was unable to produce, with his average yards over expectation sitting at negative 1.26. He's also not been getting targets, and that's a double whammy. Last night, he only averaged 2.2 yards per carry, and that wasn't just because he was up against a good defense. His yards per carry on the season is sitting at 2.68. And we've already mentioned David Bakhtiari potentially being out for the season. It's not going to get any better for AJ Dillon. So it's time to cut AJ Dillon from your rosters. We do have a question in the chat. That's a lot of reading. From AS, would you trade Kamara or Swift plus Godwin and Hopkins? Whew, for ETN, Mostert, and Dell, my wide receivers, Amari, Watson. That is a lot. Hit me up on Twitter at Britt_Flinn after the show. Let me process that because that is a lot of information. And I will get back to you and give you an answer. Now, I will preface that with saying I don't particularly like trading. Maybe it's because I'm stuck in my ways and choose to play the waiver wire, but I will get back to you. Rest of season, again, I can't do rest of season. It's a matchup based situation. I don't want to say, maybe somebody gets hurt. Maybe Ryan Tannehill is replaced. It's very hard to answer a rest of season question. If you ask me a question, let's go with this week and then just keep tuning in. And then I can keep answering your questions as the season goes along. So let's keep moving with the running backs. And I'm going to take a full L on this. So everybody circle around the campfire, the truth circle, the trust circle, whatever you want to call it. I was one of the biggest proponents for Antonio Gibson going into the season due to his pass catching ability and Eric Bieniemy entering the picture. But I am admitting in front of everyone, hi, my name is Britt, and I was wrong on Antonio Gibson. I was wrong. The Commanders' offense is just so inefficient as a whole, and Gibson, through 3 games, only has a total of 14 touches. 14. His yards per carry is sitting at 5, and his yards per reception is at 8.71. But that doesn't matter if the Commanders refuse to use him. And that's the situation that we're finding ourselves in at this point. It's not a problem with Gibson. It's a problem with usage. And for that reason, it's over now. Let's move on to a couple tight ends before we close out this segment. First, another Titan, Chig Okonkwo. For much of the same reasons that I'm cutting Treylon Burks, I'm cutting Chig from my fantasy rosters. He's at almost a 16% target share, but his yards per target is 1.8. 1.8. That's horrible. I don't blame him. I blame this offense again because they're so inefficient. But nonetheless, he's done for me. You've got to cut him from your rosters. Finally, it's over for me, Mr. Dalton Schultz, former Dallas Cowboy, now Houston Texan. He's currently ranked tight end 39 in PPR leagues. He's only seeing a 10.3% target share with 3 yards per target. I knew that we hoped he was going to be CJ Stroud's security blanket, but with the emergence of Tank Dell, this guy is just not it. So I'm very sorry, Dalton, but it's over. You got to go. All right, guys, we're going to take a real quick break, and then we're going to get into nothing tastes better than revenge and talk about some Underdog Fantasy picks for this week. And hold tight. We'll be right back.
The Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, and they let him be the quarterback for a long time, too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. Mm-hmm. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. I there's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl. And when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. I was, yeah, well, he played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Here's the thing, too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible, though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
I would.
But Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game that they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman, and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky, is number 5 on the list as terms of passing yards go.
I don't want to cut off this music. It's such a vibe. Like, it has me feeling ready. It has me feeling pumped, but we've got a lot more stuff to cover today. So thank you if you're just now joining us. This is Britt's Fantasy Blitz with your host, Britt Flinn. And I don't know if you heard, but it is officially NFL Revenge Week. And I'm going to, I love a good revenge narrative, maybe just because of the drama, because of the gossip, because of all the just testosterone and energy around it. But this is a real thing. So bear with me for a second as I get a little bit scientific on you guys. This revenge game narrative is a real thing. It was actually studied last year in the Journal of Behavioral and Experimental Economics. A group of Russian scientists showed that pro athletes play better than their mean against their former teams. Whether that is because of emotion, their familiarity with the team, or a combination of different factors, they really can't say. But the revenge narrative is scientifically proven to have some merit. And we've seen this in the NFL too, right? Brett Favre's return to Lambeau Field with the Vikings. He beat the Packers both times that season. Peyton Manning beating the Colts in his 3rd season with Denver after they let him go after drafting Andrew Luck. Wide receiver Steve Smith torching the Panthers. After the Panthers cut him, he actually said, "There will be blood and guts everywhere," in typical Steve Smith fashion, right? But he wasn't wrong. Smith ended up finishing with a stat line of 139 yards and 7 catches and scored 2 touchdowns. There was also Joe Montana's return to San Francisco after they drafted Steve Young and sent Montana to the Chiefs. So this has been kind of proven historically over time. And since there are a ton of revenge games this week, I wanted to cover them and go into a better than revenge situation. So before we get into that, I think I did see a question in the chat about was it my scroller is not working? There we go. I think it was asking about Trevor. Yeah, Trevor Lawrence in London or Russell Wilson. That is so hard because both of these offenses have been pretty putrid so far. I think I'm still going to roll with the better quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, but it doesn't make me feel good against that Falcons secondary. It does not make me feel good. I think the reason that I'm not leaning Russell Wilson is that I think that the Broncos are going to run quite a bit on the Bears and that Russell's going to sit back and, take second chair and be a little bit of a game manager and just learn what to do in a Sean Payton offense. But I think they finish fairly close, to be honest. So let's move into some of these revenge games. First one is, speaking of the London game, Calvin Ridley versus the Falcons. It seems like so long ago, but Ridley was drafted by the Falcons in the first round of the NFL draft, and he did have a top 5 fantasy season there. Atlanta secondary has been pretty good this season, so it will be interesting to see if Ridley can produce against a team that's only allowed the 7th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position. But with Zay Jones unlikely to play, it really looks like Ridley, well, he's been ruled out, so never mind. With Zay Jones out, it looks like Ridley is going to see an uptick in targets, and he's got to be better than the last 2 weeks. A second, which really, again, this is just a cathartic show, guys. We're ripping Band-Aids off. We're coming to terms with loss. The next one is Ezekiel Elliott versus the Dallas Cowboys, and this one makes me very, very sad. I'm not expecting huge fireworks in this game as a whole, as Zeke is still splitting carries with Ramondre Stevenson, but he did have a 5 yards per carry average in week 3 against a very tough Jets defensive line. If Zeke shows up and torches the Cowboys defensive line, which we've seen can happen, James Conner did it last week, Jerry Jones is going to feel very stupid on his yacht for letting him go, especially with all the problems they've experienced on their offensive line. I would not be surprised if Ezekiel Elliott once again scored a touchdown because the end zone in Dallas is his home and his favorite place to live. I hope the Cowboys still win that game, but Zeke is set up to have a very good game. On the flip side of the same game, Brandon Cooks versus New England. Cooks has been kind of a journeyman throughout his career, so it's tough to kind of pinpoint matchup or revenge games with him. But during his 1 year in New England, he had over 1,000 yards and over 100 targets. The matchup against the Patriots and rookie tight end Christian Gonzalez isn't the best, and Cooks has been banged up, but he wants to prove something to Bill Belichick for not keeping him after a 1,000-yard season. Bill Belichick just kind of like tossed him to the side and was like, well, you did what you needed to do. We're done with you. And at age 30, that Brandon Cooks has something to prove. Next is Odell Beckham Jr. versus the Browns. If only Baker Mayfield was still the quarterback of the Browns, this one would pack a lot more punch. But as it stands, there aren't many players left who were there during the OBJ experience. Still, I really expect Beckham to be out there if he's healthy and able to go to prove that he's better than how he was utilized there. Again, it's going to be a tough matchup against the Browns, especially with Greg Newsome returning. And Beckham is listed as questionable, so this one could flame out pretty quickly. But if nothing else, he can just, pack that Super Bowl ring that he won with the Rams in the year after the Browns released him and maybe bring a little bit of FOMO to the Cleveland sideline. Next, we've got Jameis Winston versus the Bucs. And we never celebrate injuries on this show. Never, 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 never. But there was some New Orleans magic in the universe to make this happen. Winston infamously, obviously, became the first quarterback to throw for 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions during the same season in his final year at Tampa Bay. But since he's had LASIK surgery, which was jokingly blamed on his lack of ball security, He's got two extremely good receivers in Chris Olave and Michael Thomas. I think that this could be back to the huck it, chuck it football without the interceptions. This one could be a low scoring matchup because both defenses are pretty good, but I expect Winston to air it out and remind Tampa Bay of just how big of an arm that he has. Next, we've got Adam Thielen versus the Vikings. And this one, again, makes me sad because Adam Thielen said in an interview that he's not looking forward to it. He spent so many years with the Vikings. He didn't want to leave. He and Kirk Cousins had a relationship and a rapport out there on the field. And now he's going to be fighting for a win as one of the only remaining winless teams out there, which coincidentally is his old team. But over the past 2 weeks, Thielen has been very, very good. And with Andy Dalton under center last week, he had 11 receptions, 145 yards, and a touchdown. It obviously could be a little bit different now with Bryce Young back under center, but he should still have a very good game against a very, very bad Vikings defense because the Vikings have allowed the third most fantasy points to the wide receiver position through 3 weeks. So I do look for Thielen to have a big game. Chris Sellers in the chat. The Revenge Factor DFS lineup would be fun to do if they weren't all dusty old farts. I can't disagree with you there. Can't disagree with you. You make a very good point. And speaking of dusty old farts, let's move on to Geno Smith versus the Giants. At this point, you could almost make a case for every game being a revenge game for Geno Smith since he's played for so many teams, but we have to include it, especially since he has been so good as a Seahawks starter and the Giants have been so incredibly bad on each side of the ball. Just not going to be a great game, but it is on primetime, so we do have that. Next, we've got Mecole Hardman versus the Chiefs, and you kind of wonder if maybe Hardman is wondering if he should have made a stronger case to stay in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes after the disaster of a season that the Jets have had. This is not a guy that I'm looking for to actually expound upon the revenge game narrative, as he has only had one single target this entire year. So yeah, not looking for a big impact with Mecole Hardman, but you never know with revenge games. As a bonus, I'm looking at Michael Wilson versus the 49ers. I know this isn't technically a revenge game, okay? I know that Wilson is a rookie, but it is interesting since he was passed upon by the 49ers. And Wilson played college at Stanford, which is located in Santa Clara County, which is only about 20 or 30 minutes away from Levi's Stadium. And do you guys know what Stanford's mascot is? It is the Cardinal. Boom. Faux revenge game, baby. But on the actual analytical side of things, with Marquise Brown showing up on the injury report, Wilson could have an interesting day, even if it is just garbage time. So keep your eyes out for all of these revenge matchups. Make sure that you maybe have some Taylor Swift Better Than Revenge on repeat. Who knows? Whatever gets you in the mood for a good revenge game. Sellers will not be listening to Taylor Swift. He will most likely be listening to some Pantera, Metallica, whatever flavor of revenge you like. Just get yourself hyped because this is going to be a great week for NFL. Mr. Scampers in the chat says, as a Panthers fan and someone who really needs Andy Dalton to be a stud in SFB again, I'm bummed they're not letting Bryce heal up for another week. I kind of agree with you. Andy Dalton, as old as he is, seems to get it done over and over and over again. I mean, he's just not going away. He's vintage at this point, but he still gets things done. And it will probably affect Thielen a little bit, but with Jonathan Mingo out, who else are they going to go to? So I'll leave that there. Let's move on and hit up some Underdog Fantasy picks because there are a lot of very, very fun things happening over at Underdog Fantasy. And as you guys know, or maybe don't know if you're new to the stream, Britt's Fantasy Blitz is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy offers new contests and chances to win every single day. You can play their pick'em contest by choosing higher or lower on 2 to 5 of your favorite players' stats, and the more you pick, the more you win. You can choose from MLB, NFL, PGA, and more sports. Underdog Fantasy also offers daily drafts with leagues ranging from 2 to 12 players, and now there is a brand new way to play Underdog Fantasy. Make sure to tune in during the game to play their in-game pick'em contests. All you need to do to get involved in these games is to sign up at fantasyalarm.com/underdog with promo code ALARM. First-time depositors get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And again, that's fantasyalarm.com/underdog with the promo code ALARM. Not only is Underdog Fantasy doing their in-game pick'ems, which I absolutely love. I'm always on my phone during the game. They are also giving away $2 million during this NFL season by introducing $100,000 Sundays. Each week, a $100,000 pot will be up for grabs to those who submit a pick'em entry with the designated player. They give out $10,000 to 10 different winners. And this week, the player is Dameon Pierce. Now, you can enter this by choosing either the higher or lower on his total yardage versus the Pittsburgh Steelers and be entered to win. The stat is currently at 63.5 total yards, and I'm going to go lower there. So if you want to get in on this $100,000 Sunday, take that Dameon Pierce and then continue to build the rest of your picks. But speaking of the rest of your picks, you want to know what they are, right? So let's get into that and talk about some that are available for week 4. First, I'm going to go Kyle Pitts. His stat is set at 3 receptions. I'm going to go higher. I have not given up on Kyle Pitts. He had his first 100-yard receiving game and his first touchdown in his rookie season in London. Yes, he didn't do much last year, but after 9 targets last week, I expect that target volume to remain high against a Jaguars defense that has allowed the 4th most fantasy points to the tight end position. So again, Kyle Pitts, 3 receptions. We're going higher. Next, I'm going Lamar Jackson. His stat is set at 198.5 passing yards, and I am taking the lower on that. Through 3 weeks, the Ravens are only averaging 190 passing yards per game, and they're going up against a Cleveland defense that is only giving up 111 passing yards per game. Baltimore's receivers, we already mentioned Odell Beckham and Rashad Bateman are banged up and listed as questionable, so I don't expect the Todd Monken air raid to take flight this week. Lamar Jackson, passing yards, we're taking the lower. Next, I'm going to go with Tua Tagovailoa, 273.5 passing yards. I'm going to go higher. This game is set to be a shootout. And although the Dolphins used their running backs a ton last week, I really expect a much heavier passing attack, especially with Jalen Waddle back in that lineup. Bills safety Jordan Poyer is also listed as questionable, and I think that this will be a huge help to the Dolphins passing game. So I'm going to go Tua, 273.5 passing yards, higher. Mr. Scampers in the chat, Lamar is down to 185.5, but I would still take it. I would too. Drop Dotson for dubs. Yes, absolutely do that. So let's get back to these picks. Next, I'm going to go with James Cook. His rushing stat is set at 56.5 rushing yards. I'm going higher on this all day long. He's had over 220 rushing yards the past 2 games. And while the Dolphins have been good against running back receptions, they're still allowing 130 rushing yards per game. Cook is the main guy in this backfield, and I expect them to use the run game a ton to maintain time of possession and kind of keep that ball out of Miami's hands. So again, James Cook, 56.5 rushing yards. We are taking higher. Finally, let's look at Jamar Chase, 82.5 receiving yards. I mentioned this with Joe Burrow against the Tennessee Titans defense. I'm taking the higher here. I know the Bengals have been bad, but if this isn't a get-right game, I don't know what is. The Titans have allowed the fourth most fantasy points to the wide receiver position so far, and they've allowed 275 passing yards per game. Chase is that dude. So that wraps up our underdog picks of the day. Again, to sign up and get involved with Underdog Fantasy, go to fantasyalarm.com/underdog, use the promo code ALARM, and first-time users get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Along with these pick'em contests, they're also running weekly contests, battle royales. There is honestly something for everything at Underdog Fantasy. So get on over there and check that out. Um, Guys, if you guys have any more starter sit questions or comments, anything like that in the chat, I would love to help you out on that as we get into week 4. It's just been kind of crazy. I feel like week 4 is really where we make or break our fantasy teams, because we can start 0-3. But if we go 0-4, that is a very, very uphill climb to make it into the playoffs. Similar to a lot of these teams that are facing off who were winless this week: the Broncos, the Bears, the Vikings, the Panthers. I would wager to say that somebody gets fired on one or both of the losing teams after this week if they cannot pull together a win, because it is getting to be crunch time. I know that it feels that football just started, but we are a quarter of the way through the season after this week. And it's mind blowing to me. So, best of luck. If you guys have anything that you need help with, John and Pemba and I will also be doing our Start Sit show on Sunday morning on the Better Sports Network YouTube page at 9 a.m. Eastern, answering all your Start Sit questions. After that, Andrew Cooper and Howard Bender will be on SiriusXM doing their Start Sit show and answering all of your questions. And to bring it all full circle, Coop joins John at noon Eastern. I'm so confused with my Easterns and Centrals at this time, but they will be wrapping it all up with your last minute Start Sit questions on the Better Sports Network YouTube page. So make sure to tune into all of those. We've got you covered. As always, the injury reports will be rolling in as new injuries pop up, as people get cleared, people get ruled out, things like that. And if you can't tune into some of those shows, make sure to sign up for the Fantasy Alarm All Pro subscription so that you can pop into our Discord and ask our experts questions in real time. Like I mentioned earlier, we are currently offering a 7-day free trial, but that free trial may be going away. So to take advantage of it, go to fantasyalarm.com/allpro, get linked up to our Discord, talk to our experts, access all of our sports, our lineup generator, our tools, our articles, everything that you need for Sundays is over there on fantasyalarm.com. And if you missed it earlier, make sure to download the Bettercast app. Join the free-to-play contest, chat with everybody in the chat. You can play during real time. It's a very integrative and fun way to keep engaged during the game. To download it, go to the Apple App Store. I always say Play Store because I'm an Android girl, or the Google Play Store, and download the Bettercast app today for your chance to win free prizes. And we all love free things. So, Mr. Scampers, telling you all the lines are moving. Yes, everything is moving. As more and more of these updates come in, we will continue to see movement, and they can even move during your picks. I had to accept one earlier when I was placing one. Hal asks, Josh Palmer or Najee yards? Are you worried about Najee? I'm tentatively worried about Najee. I think he's in a very good place this week against the Houston Texans. I don't know if Palmer is going to get I need some more context. Is it who's going to get the most yardage? I'm not worried about Najee, but just as a receiver, I feel like that lends itself more to yardage. So yeah, let's go with Palmer there. So coming up, thank you guys so much for joining me for my first show back in a couple of weeks. Really appreciate you guys all tuning in and asking your questions. The fantasy football game show is off today. But at the 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern hour, the Better Sports Betting Show with Dan Servadidio and Howard Bender will be on. From 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, the MLB DFS live stream with James Grande and John Impemba will be on. Make sure to tune into that. Make sure to tune in to all of our start-sit shows on Sunday. Join that Discord, people. I cannot tell you how valuable that Discord is in getting all of your questions answered. And make sure to sign up for Underdog Fantasy, fantasyalarm.com/underdog. Mr. Scampers with an if question, fingers crossed. SFB, Hollywood at San Francisco, Boyd at Tennessee, or Samaje at Chicago. So Hollywood Brown actually popped up on the injury report yesterday. So I'm uncertain that he plays as well. I think Samaje Perine has just been phased out, unfortunately, even though this matchup looks good on paper. The snaps just aren't really lending themselves to him getting fantasy points. So I think I'm going Boyd, although I do not feel comfortable with any of these selections. Let's manifest that Miles Sanders plays on Sunday against a very bad Vikings defense. So, Hal, thank you so much. Great to have you here, and great to have you here. Appreciate everybody being in the chat, asking your questions, being interactive. If you haven't, make sure that you like and subscribe to the show. And whether you're watching on the Fantasy Alarm YouTube page or the Better Sports YouTube page, make sure to go hit that subscribe button while you're there. So that wraps it up for today, guys. We've got a ton of revenge again. Maybe I'll put a poll up on Twitter. What's your favorite revenge song? I think that would be very fun. Let's gear up for Revenge Week and NFL Week 4. We will see you next Friday. Until then, have a great weekend. And as always, thank you so much for getting blitzed.